The room was dark, and they were not supposed to be there. She could feel his heart. That was the thing she would never be able to shake, no matter how many times she turned it over afterward. She was pressed against the wall with his body blocking hers, and his hand flat over her mouth, and the only sound in the entire world was a guard's slow, deliberate footsteps in the corridor just outside. And his heart, hammering against her back like it was trying to get out. She had been watching this man for 10 days. She had watched him walk into a sparring match against 3 people simultaneously and come out looking like he had been on a pleasant stroll. She had watched him take a punishment run in the cold, without his breathing changing once. She had watched him stand so still in a crowded room that he looked less like a person and more like a very convincing painting of one. She had decided very early that nothing got to this man. Nothing cracked the surface. His heart was absolutely cracking the surface. It was pounding so hard she could feel it through both their jackets. The footsteps outside slowed. The handle on the storage room door rattled. She stopped breathing. Welcome. If you are new here, this is the channel where Black women are not the background or the lesson. They are the reason for everything. Hit subscribe right now and turn on that notification bell because this story is going to do something to you and you are going to want every single part of it. Drop a comment before we even start. Have you ever been in a room with someone and known, you're right in that moment, that everything was about to change? Tell me below. Now let's go back to where this all began. Joon-ho's apartment told you everything about him without saying a word. 1 couch. 1 table. A kitchen used for exactly what kitchens exist for and nothing extra. No photographs on the walls, no plants, nothing soft. Nothing that needed tending. The only thing in that apartment that carried any real weight was the corkboard covering most of the wall in his office, built layer by careful layer over 19 years. Photographs, printed documents, handwritten notes in 3 languages, all connected by red string. This was not a hobby. This was not curiosity. This was the architecture of a life pointed in one direction, and at the center of all that red string, pinned cleanly, was 1 photograph. Zaya Martins. 58 years old. Businessman, soul, a face, a name. 19 years. On the nightstand beside his bed sat 1 more photograph. Face down. Always face down. He had not looked at it directly in years. He didn't need to. He knew every detail without looking. His mother's laugh, his father's hands, the 3 of them outside a house that no longer existed, on a Sunday afternoon when the world was still the shape it was supposed to be. He was 10 when it stopped being that shape. His phone rang. He looked at the screen and picked up on the 2nd ring. Uncle. Kai. Victor's voice was warm the way it had always been warm. The unhurried, settled warmth of a man who had been the one steady thing in Kai's life since the night everything else stopped being steady. You sound like you're already up. I'm always already up. I know. One day I'm going to call and you'll answer from bed like a human being. A pause. Comfortable and easy. How are you? How's the program? Good. I'm close. How close? Kai looked at the corkboard. At Zaya Martins' face at the center of 19 years of red string. 2 weeks from certification. Once I'm in the circles where he moves. I'll have access. Victor was quiet for a moment. Not a surprised quiet. The quiet of a man holding something heavy and feeling the full weight of it. Your parents would be proud, he said, of everything you've built, all of it, every single piece. Kai said nothing. He kept looking at the photograph. Is there anything else? Victor asked. Something careful in how he said it. Not suspicious. Attentive. It's the way someone asks when they already sense there might be more. No, Kai said. Nothing else? All right. Warm again. Easy. Keep going. You're almost there, son. He hung up. He stood in front of the board for another minute. Then he picked up his bag and walked out into the Seoul morning. Same route, same time. He stopped at the base of a building on Yongsan-gu, looked up at it for 4 seconds the way he always did, and kept running. Nothing about that morning felt like the last ordinary one he would ever have. 3 kilometers across the city, Zaya Martins was in an argument with a painting, and the painting was winning. She was standing in front of a large canvas in her studio, arms crossed, head tilted at the specific angle of someone who has located the exact problem and is taking it personally. And the painting was a woman underwater, arms spread wide, neither drowning nor floating, held in the suspension between 2 choices, waiting for something to decide which way she'd go. Zaya had been working on it for 3 weeks. The shadow in the lower left had been wrong for 2 of them, and she had tried to fix it approximately 40 times, and it remained wrong, and she was beginning to consider it a personal attack. "Right," she said out loud to the painting. "Fine. Have it your way." She put down the brush. She went to make tea. Her phone rang. "You're up," her father said. "I didn't sleep," I replied. "You were painting." "I was almost finished." She could hear the smile in his voice. James Martins had a smile you could hear through a phone, warm and unhurried and entirely real. "There is a training program," he said. "Outside Seoul. 3 weeks, residential. The best facility in the country." She pulled the phone away from her ear, looked at it, put it back. "I'm an artist, Appa. They're accepting non-military applicants this cycle. I already registered your name." She went still. "You registered me, without asking." "I did. For an elite security program." "Yes." "Why?" A pause, too considered to be nothing. "The world I move in, butterfly. The circles, the attention, the things that come with what I do. I need to know you can handle yourself if something happens when I'm not there." "What kind of something?" She was very still now. Something in his voice was doing a thing she couldn't quite name. "Appa? What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing you need to worry about right now." "That is not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to get you registered." A beat, then softer. All warmth, all father. 3 weeks. Just do this one thing for me. She opened her mouth to argue. The thing underneath his voice. Careful, deliberate. The precision she had noticed in a handful of moments across her whole life and never looked at too directly. Stopped her words before they got out. She had always left 2 things about her father separate. The warmth, which was completely real, and something underneath the warmth that was also real, and that she had never needed to examine until this moment. 3 weeks, she said. "Thank you, butterfly." He was off the call before she could change her mind. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment looking at her phone. She thought about the careful pause before he answered, the deflection, the way he had already registered her before calling, which meant the decision was made before the conversation started. Her father was a man who thought several steps ahead. He always had been. She had always found it reassuring. Right now, standing in her kitchen at 7 in the morning, it felt like something slightly different. She went back to the painting. She stood in front of the woman suspended in blue water, arms wide, and didn't pick up the brush. The facility was 40 minutes outside Seoul, and it was serious about every inch of itself. Wide corridors, high ceilings, the smell of floor wax and absolute purpose. People who moved through the space with the efficiency of those who had nothing left to prove and had known it for years. And then the door opened and Zaya walked in. She had paint on her left wrist, a thin line of burnt sienna she hadn't noticed until she was already inside, and a bag that made zero effort to hide the 2 sketchbooks sitting directly on top of her kit. She walked into that room the way she had walked into every room where she had ever been the only one of something, like she had every right to the air in it, because she had learned a long time ago that the moment you acted like you were borrowing space, people treated it like truth. There were 17 officers in that room when she arrived. Every single one of them turned to look. She set her bag down in the front row, straightened up, and looked around with the easy patience of a woman who was in absolutely no rush. The instructor's voice cut through the room. Before anything else, before drills, before assessment, before any of it, he explained the rules of the floor. Numbers only. Each trainee had a number stitched onto their kit, assigned at registration in order of arrival. On this floor, that number was how you would be addressed and how you would address each other. No names, no ranks from the outside world, a level playing field. Understood, he had bellowed. Understood. Everyone replied. 001 had registered first. It was Joon-ho. Of course he was the first. He was the kind of man who arrived early and spent the time before things started reviewing what he already knew. He was standing on the far side of the room, 6'4", wide shoulders, army cut dark and sharp above a face that was honestly unreasonable in how it looked. And he had already assessed every person in the room and filed them all somewhere useful before Zaya had finished setting down her bag. When he looked at her, the assessment was 4 seconds, clean and professional. Then he went back to his notes. 018 had registered last. Zaya. Of course she had. She had been on a phone call in the car park and jogged through the door with her bag not fully zipped and paint on her wrist and no particular apology about any of it. The instructor looked at his sheet and put 001 and 018 together, the most disciplined person in the room, paired with the last person through the door. The irony would not be lost on anyone watching. She heard her number called with his and looked across the room at the man who hadn't been staring at her since she walked in, because he had already looked, assessed, and returned to work. She thought, that is going to be difficult. Then she thought, interesting. He crossed to her, extended his hand, and she took it. Try to keep up, he said. She raised one eyebrow. Try to be less boring. He blinked. Once. Slowly. Like a man deciding whether that had actually just happened. She smiled at the back of his head as he walked away. By the end of the first afternoon, she understood the situation clearly. Everyone in that room had been doing this their entire adult lives. The defensive block the instructor demonstrated. Every officer had it by the second try. She was on attempt 11, getting it wrong in the same place every time. A fraction off in her right elbow that she could feel but not fix, and she was not going to ask for help. Then 001 was behind her. He stepped around her, reached forward, and adjusted her right elbow with 2 fingers. One correction. Precise. He was already walking back across the room before she processed that he had moved. She tried the block. It landed. Perfectly. Completely right. She spun to say something, and he was in a different conversation on the other side of the room, his back to her, completely unaware of the thing he had just done. She turned back to the mat. There was something small and warm in her chest. She didn't name it yet, but she noticed it. The way you notice something you know you will think about later. The next day. The morning run was 6 kilometers, and it did not forgive anyone. So she was at the back of the pack by kilometer 3 and falling further back, and she was not going to stop. She would walk before she stopped in front of these people. She slowed to something that required generosity to call running, and kept going, and had a quiet, internal conversation with her lungs about the nature of commitment. Then someone fell into stride beside her. 001. Running at her pace, which was roughly half his, with the expression of a man on a leisurely morning walk. Your arms are crossing, he said. You're wasting energy. I cannot hear you, she said, breathing hard, over the sound of my own death. Arms forward and back, not across, he instructed. She fixed her arms. She hated immediately that she could feel the difference. He ran beside her for the last 2 kilometers without another word, just there, steady. At the finish line, he peeled away without looking back, and she stood bent double with her hands on her knees staring at the ground. Something had moved. Not in her legs. The fall techniques arrived and Zaya had feelings about every single one. "You're fighting it," Joon-ho said, standing over her on attempt 3. "I am fighting it," she confirmed from the mat, staring up at the ceiling with the energy of someone making a considered philosophical point. "Because it is actively working against me and I have the right to respond in kind. You're bracing before you even start falling. Your body is trying to protect itself from something that hasn't happened yet. Yes, that is called instinct. It is how humans survive." He looked down at her. His jaw was doing a very small thing. "Get up." "I am getting up." She rolled to her feet with tremendous dignity, barely fighting an eye roll. "Under protest. I want that noted." "It's noted. Now lead the fall. Don't wait for it. Commit before it happens." She tried again. Got it wrong in the same way. Landed and made a sound from somewhere deep and genuine. Not pain exactly, just the specific suffering of someone doing something they did not sign up for. She lay there for a moment. "I want you to know," she said to the ceiling, "that I was a perfectly good artist before this." "Again," he encouraged. She got up. She went again. Forward this time, weight committed. She landed right and came up and stood very still for a moment. "Oh," she said. Again. She did it right again. She turned to him with the biggest grin she had. "Did you see that? Can I get some acknowledgement? Any words at all?" "It was good," he said. And there it was. The jaw doing the thing. The quarter inch that wasn't quite a smile but was undeniably the shape of one. Again. She went again, grinning the whole way through, and 2 officers nearby who had been watching her since day 1 exchanged a glance that had changed considerably from the one they'd exchanged on arrival. A real fall came 2 days later during a weight distribution exercise, her foot hitting the edge of the mat wrong, genuinely wrong, nothing staged about it. And the nearest thing she grabbed was 001's arm, and they ended up face to face with 3 inches of air between them. The room kept going. They did not. 1 beat. 2. Long enough to understand that something in the air between them had shifted. "I have you," he said. Quiet. Even. He righted her slowly and stepped back. His face was composed. His jaw had done something brief that he had already corrected. She turned away first, heat moving up her neck. That night he lay in the dark and thought, with his usual systematic attention, about the fact that he was struggling not to watch her. He had never struggled not to watch anyone. He filed it under irrelevant and stared at the ceiling until his mind obeyed. It did not obey. She called him Tiger by accident on a day that had already been long. He was across the room with his back to her when she picked up her water bottle without thinking and threw it overhand. "Oi, Tiger, catch." He caught it without looking. The way certain people catch things. Before you've finished watching it, leave your hand. Each before the decision to catch has announced itself. He turned slowly. His expression was not quite a smile, but was the undeniable shape of one. "You prowl," she said, walking over to take the bottle back, entirely unbothered by the 10 people who could hear her. "You don't just walk anywhere. Every step looks decided in advance. You move through a room like you already know exactly how it ends." She tilted her head. "It's very Tiger." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Wild fox." She blinked. "I'm sorry. You think you're the cleverest person in every room you walk into." His voice was even. Something moved behind it. "You are. A little. But foxes always get caught." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. 3 full seconds of nothing, which was, for Zaya Martins, essentially uncharted territory. And then she laughed. The full version, uncontained, filling the room. And 001, who had already turned away, went completely still for one single beat before continuing what he was doing. The name stayed, not by decision, just by being too true to let go. She called her father that evening from the low wall outside the facility, with the last of the day's sun turning the hills orange. "A man caught my water bottle today without looking," she said when James picked up. "Without even turning around. Who does that?" "A trained man. He is extremely annoying." "You don't sound annoyed." "I am. Deeply. I'm processing it." She watched a bird cross the sky. "He corrected my form without being asked, and then walked away before I could say thank you. Like, he didn't need the thank you." "Who does that either?" "A confident man. Or a difficult one." James laughed. "Are you all right, Butterfly? Is it going well?" "It's going terribly and brilliantly in alternating intervals," she said. "Today I had a long argument with the floor and came out 5th. Which I think is actually impressive given what I started with." "I think so too." She paused. "Appa. Seriously, is everything okay? You've seemed, I don't know, careful lately." A beat on his end. That same careful beat from the phone call before she left. "Everything is fine," he said. Warm, steady. "Focus on the program. I'm proud of you." She said goodnight and sat on the wall for a while after, watching the light go, turning the careful beat over in her mind. Her father had always been warm. He had always also been precise, and she had just never put those two things in the same sentence before. She went back inside. Victor called during the second week. Kai stepped outside the facility into the cold, back against the wall. "Uncle." "You sound different," Victor said. "Training. It's intensive," he replied. "Different from intensive." A pause. Warm. Careful. "Is something happening?" Kai was quiet for a moment, then because he had not lied to Victor in 19 years. "There's a trainee, my paired partner. She makes focus difficult." Victor was quiet long enough that Kai checked the connection. "She," his uncle said finally. "It's not what you think." "I'm not thinking anything. I'm listening. It's under control." "Kai." Victor's voice settled into something gentle, in the specific gentleness of a man who had watched a 10-year-old boy grow into a soldier and quietly worried the whole time. "You have spent 19 years building toward one thing. You are weeks away from that door opening. Whatever this is, don't let it cost you what you've built." A pause. "But you are also a human being. You are allowed to be one. Just be careful." "I'm always careful. I know you are." Warm. Settled. "That's why I'm not worried." He hung up and stood outside in the cold for a while. Then he went back in, and she was across the training floor doing something completely wrong with her stance and complaining about it to no one in particular. And he looked at her for 2 seconds longer than was necessary before crossing to correct the stance. He said nothing about the 2 seconds. And it was late in the second week. Common room, quiet evening, and she was done being 018 to a man who caught things without looking. She sat cross-legged on the floor next to his chair while he reviewed notes, her sketchbook in hand. Not talking. Just drawing. Just there. The specific patience of a woman who had figured out that the closest thing to a conversation with this man was existing near him and waiting. After a few minutes, he said, without looking down, "What are you drawing?" "You." A pause. "Why?" "Because you're interesting to look at." She tilted the sketchbook toward him, his shoulders, the way his hands held the pages. "You look different when you're not in the middle of doing something." "How?" "More like a person." He looked at the drawing, then at her. Something moved in his face that he didn't close in time. "What's your actual name?" she said. "Not the number." He looked back at his notes. She thought he wasn't going to answer, then. "Kai." She tried it. "Kai." Decided it fit. "I'm Zaya." A beat. She smiled. You can call me Z. People who actually matter call me Z. She looked up at him with bright eyes and something warm in her expression. Does that include you? He met her gaze. Do you have a nickname? She said. No. She looked at him for a moment. You do now, Tiger, she said pleasantly, and turned back to her drawing. He looked at the side of her face. Then he went back to his notes. He did not call her Z that evening, but he also stopped calling her 018. She left her sketchbook in the storage room on an afternoon when she had been arguing with Seojun about matte surfaces and walked away without it. She knew exactly where it was. She also knew the rules. After 10 at night, rooms only. No exceptions. She lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She needed to draw. Not wanted. Needed. The pressure behind her eyes that had nowhere else to go. She checked her bag twice. The sketchbook was definitely in that storage room. She sat up, picked up her phone and typed. I left my art stuff in the storage room. I'm a little scared to go alone. Come? She added a small fox emoji at the end and pressed send before she could think better of it. In his room, his phone lit up. He read it. He looked at the ceiling. He typed. Absolutely not. This is against the rules. Put the phone down, picked it back up, deleted it. Typed. This is completely inappropriate and I want it on record that I'm doing this once and never again. He put the phone down again, stared at the ceiling for 30 full seconds. Then, he got up and put his shoes on. He knocked once on her door. It opened immediately. She was already in her jacket. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was deeply, specifically disappointed in himself. Once, he said. Once, she agreed, already moving down the hall. The storage room was at the end of the east corridor. Dark and dense, equipment packed floor to ceiling. He pushed the door open slowly. She slipped in. He followed. The door clicked shut behind them. He put his hand lightly on her shoulder to guide her through the dark. She moved toward the back shelves. Her fingers found the sketchbook, found the tin of charcoal, and then they both heard it at the exact same instant. Footsteps. From the corridor. Unhurried. Getting closer. They went still in perfect unison, not by agreement, by the same instinct arriving at the same moment. Kai moved without thinking. One arm around her from behind, pulling her back against him into the narrow gap behind the equipment rack. Her back to his chest, both of them facing toward the door. She went completely still. The footsteps reached the door. The handle rattled. His hand came up from behind and covered her mouth. Firm, palm flat, warm. The door swung open. A flashlight swept through the room in slow arcs. She watched the beam from the gap between shelves. It passed 2 feet from where they were standing. The guard muttered something to himself, pulled the door shut. The footsteps moved off down the corridor. Then there was silence. Her back was against his chest. His hand was still over her mouth. And she could feel, clearly, through every layer between them, his heart. Pounding. Fast and hard and completely out of control for a man whose whole identity was built on being in control. She had watched him take impacts in sparring that would rattle most people and come out of them steady. She had watched him receive a punishment run like it was a minor scheduling adjustment. She had decided early that nothing cracked this man's surface. His heart was absolutely cracked. She stood very still with that knowledge and thought, oh. He lowered his hand slowly, stepped back. She let out a careful breath. She opened her mouth to ask him, warmly, with great interest, at full Zaya volume. The very reasonable question that was forming on her tongue. She forgot entirely that the guard was probably still within earshot. He spun around. His hand came back, this time pulling her to face him. Chest to chest now. Both facing each other in the dark, his face coming down toward hers. He might still be close. He breathed, and she felt his heart again. Against hers this time, where their chests pressed together. If anything, louder than before. She tilted her head very slowly and deliberately, angling her ear toward his chest, letting him understand that she could hear it, letting him know she knew. He felt the smile starting against his hand. He could see it coming, her eyes brightening in the dark, the warmth rising, and the question about to come out of her at full volume, and something in him simply gave up the fight. His lips came down over hers. It was not planned. There was nothing smooth or strategic in it. It was the act of a man who had held something back for 10 days and ran completely out of places to put it. His free hand caught the wall beside her head. He felt her sharp breath of surprise against his mouth. He should stop. He did not stop. Then she gave in. A small sound against his lips. Warm. Satisfied. The sound of someone receiving something they hadn't known they'd been waiting for. And that sound went through him like a current and woke him all the way up at the same moment. He jolted back, stepped away from her in the dark, stood there for one suspended moment looking at her. Then he turned and pushed the door open and walked quickly down the corridor without looking back. Not once. She stood alone in the dark with her sketchbook held against her chest. She pressed her hand slowly over her mouth. She was not upset. She was not confused. She thought about his heart. The loud, fast, completely unguarded pounding of it first against her back and then against her chest. And she thought about the way he had held it together right up until the exact moment he couldn't anymore. The smile behind her hand grew until it was too big to stay a smile. It became a laugh she had to press into her sleeve, quiet and helpless and completely, entirely undone. He fell first. She fell harder. Right there, in the dark, with her sketchbook in her arms and his heartbeat still warm in her memory. If you're already hooked, go ahead and hit that like button right now because we are nowhere near the best part yet. Stay with us. The morning after, he sat at breakfast at his usual time, showing nothing. She sat down across from him 5 minutes later. Good morning, Tiger. Good morning. He sounded normal, contained, like always. She reached across and took a piece of toast from his tray without asking. He looked at the toast, looked at her. She bit into it with the serenity of someone who had done nothing wrong. He looked back at his food. She hid her smile in her coffee cup. On the other side of the mess hall, Seojin was watching them with the focused attention of a man whose file had just gotten very interesting. He immediately thought, his stone-cold heart is not so cold after all. And that evening he called their friend Hair in. He took a point deduction for her in week 1, Seojin said to her across the line. Kai Joon-ho, Harin said slowly. Took a point deduction. And a punishment run. He chimed. There was a pause on her end. Then, for a woman he met less than a week before. 5 days, actually. Seojin. Her voice was flat in the specific way it got when she was making a point without needing volume to make it. Do you understand what you are telling me? This man has not let a single person inside in 9 years, not one. And some woman at a boot camp got him to take a punishment run in 5 days. She called him Tiger. Seojin offered, barely holding a mischievous grin. Harin was quiet for a moment. Then, I love her already. Is she good for him? Seojin watched 001 across the mess hall, pretending not to notice 018, stealing the rest of his toast. Yes, he said. Then stop worrying and let it happen, Harin said. They talked a little more about other things, then hung up. Zaya fell asleep in the common room 3 days before the program ended. She had been sketching while he sat nearby reviewing notes, and the weeks caught up with her somewhere between one drawing and the next, and when she stopped being awake, she simply stopped. Curled on her side on the common room couch, with the sketchbook still loosely in her hand. He looked up after a few minutes and registered this, then went back to his notes. 20 minutes later, her phone lit up on the cushion beside her, buzzing silently. He could see the screen from where he sat. Appa. His hand moved toward it. The automatic reach of proximity and habit, the instinct of someone sitting close enough to be useful. He stopped himself halfway before he reached it, then sat very still. The phone kept buzzing. He looked at it again. Appa. Clearly written as the caller ID. He did not know who her father was. He knew her as Zaya, as Z, as Wild Fox, and the woman who stole food from his plate, and laughed in a way that made rooms feel larger than they were. He did not know her last name. The phone stopped buzzing. He looked at it for a moment longer. Then he looked at her sleeping face. He reached for his jacket and laid it carefully over her, then picked his notes back up. He sat there for a long time, more aware than he had been in weeks of the fact that she had become close enough for his instincts to reach for her phone, and what that meant, and what it would cost him when the program ended and the real world was on the other side of it. He did not examine that too closely. He went back to his notes. The night session in the training room was the night she finally understood something about him that could not be unfiled. She had been going late for 3 nights trying to fix the hip rotation in the defensive sequence that was wrong in the same place every time. She had not told anyone. She had not expected company. She never heard him come in. "Your hip," he said from behind her. She spun, hand to her chest. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Appear. From nowhere." "You weren't listening." He crossed to her. "The rotation is wrong. You're late with it. The power starts before the move. Not at it." He stepped behind her and put his hands on her hips, moving her through it properly. "Feel the difference?" She did, immediately and completely. "Oh." Again. They worked for 2 hours in the half-lit room, just his voice between them and the sound of her moving. Patient, precise. Somewhere around 40 minutes in, she stopped and turned around. "Why are you here?" she said. "You finished first. You have nothing left." He was quiet. "You keep showing up," she said. "The run, the correction. Now this. Why?" He held her gaze. In the half-dark, his face was more open than it was in daylight. The careful composure slightly loosened. The real person slightly closer. "Because you get up every time," he said. "Every single time. Han, for nearly 2 weeks, I have watched you get up. That deserves to finish well." She was quiet. Biting back a smile, she nodded slowly, storing it somewhere careful. "Tell me something true," she said. "You know things about me. I don't know anything about you." He held her gaze for long enough that she thought the door was going to close. Then, "My parents died when I was 10. Fire. I was at my uncle's house that night. Even and measured, but not small. Nothing about it was small. He raised me after. I don't talk about it." She did not rush in. She did not offer the things people usually offered. She stayed with it, which she understood was rarer than words. "What were they like?" she said softly. He thought. "My mother laughed at everything. Actually laughed, not for politeness. And she found things genuinely funny and didn't pretend otherwise." Something moved briefly on his face. "My father fixed things. Anything broken in the area, people brought it to him. You miss them. Every day." She crossed to him and sat on the mat in front of him. She didn't reach for him. She didn't fill the silence. She just stayed there, present and still and receiving it, being a witness to it without trying to fix it. After a moment, he sat down across from her. "I'm sorry," she said. Just that. Something moved in his face that he didn't close in time, real and unguarded and over in a second. He stood. Again. From the start. She stood and went again, and this time she felt the whole thing come together. Around 1 in the morning, she got the full sequence clean, every piece right. Everything moving exactly as it was supposed to. And she spun around, and he was smiling. Not the shape of one, an actual one. Small and private and entirely real. The kind that didn't come out often and wasn't sure what to do with itself. She stared at him. "You should do that more," she said. "It's not fair that you keep that to yourself." The smile was almost gone. Almost. "Get some sleep." He left. She stood alone in the half-lit room and pressed both hands flat over her heart. The obstacle course had a left turn at the 180-meter mark that Zaya had been taking personally since day one. It wasn't the walls. She had made peace with the walls. It wasn't the rope section or the water obstacle or even the tire sequence that bruised her shins on day 2. It was that specific left turn. The one that required her to lose momentum on purpose in order to keep it, which felt philosophically wrong to her, and she had said so out loud approximately 4 times. She ran it. She hit the first wall clean, the rope section right, the water obstacle without hesitating, which was new, and she was proud of it, the tire sequence with her shins making no new acquaintances, and then the left turn. And instead of fighting it the way she had been fighting it, she let her weight drop and her body turn through it and kept moving, and she hit the finish line with her arms out and her chest heaving, and the kind of grin on her face that could not be contained by any reasonable effort. She spun around to find him. He was already crossing toward her. She was still breathing hard, hair wild from the course, grinning wide enough that her whole face was in it. "Did you see that? All of it. Did you see?" "I saw it," he said. And something in his face, something that had been held back for 12 days, pressed flat behind every carefully maintained wall, simply arrived at its limit. He kissed her. Not like the storage room. Nothing surprised out of him this time. Nothing frustrated or unplanned. This was a decision made with his whole self, clear-eyed and certain. His hands came up and held her face, both of them, careful and deliberate, and he kissed her slowly. The kiss of a man who has made up his mind and is not apologizing for it. "She is mine." He didn't know yet how that fit around the red string and the corkboard and the name at the center of 19 years, how he would navigate his goal and this new desire. He didn't know how to resolve the two things sitting in his chest. He only knew what was true in this moment, the way he knew things that were simply, undeniably true, and this was true. She was his. She kissed him back with everything she had. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Eyes closed, just breathing. The afternoon around them and the cold air and all of it. "Tiger," she said softly. He opened his eyes and looked at her, like she was the most inconvenient and inevitable thing that had ever happened to him. Like she was something he had walked into without seeing it coming and could not find it in himself to be sorry about. "My wild fox," he said. The "my" arrived for the first time. Quiet. Enormous. He hadn't planned it. It simply came out with the weight of something that had been true for a while, and was only now saying so out loud. She felt it land. Her eyes went bright in a way that she didn't try to hide, and didn't need to. She was still smiling when Seo-jun, standing 40 feet away at the edge of the course where he had been watching the whole thing, let out a slow breath and looked at the sky. He thought, "I need to call Hair in." The final assessments came. She finished 5th. In a room full of professionals who had been doing this their whole adult lives, she came 5th. She stood looking at the board and felt, for one honest moment, the particular sting of almost. Then she saw his number, 001. First by a gap that would have been even wider if not for the point deductions he had taken in the first week, and deductions he had taken for her. She turned and found him across the room. She crossed to him. And without planning it or announcing it, in full view of every officer on that floor and the instructor standing at the far wall, she threw her arms around him. He froze. The whole room went quiet the way rooms do when something unexpected happens in a space that runs on precision and professionalism. An instructor looked up. Seo-jun, against the far wall, stopped moving entirely. She was hugging him, arms around his neck, completely genuine, the hug of someone who had decided this was happening and was cheerfully waiting for the world to catch up. He stood there rigid for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, like a man reminding himself that he was allowed, his arms came around her, settling, his chin dropping to somewhere near her temple. She pulled back and looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. "We did it." He looked at her face. Not measured, not filed, not anything he usually was. Just him. "You did it," he said. The award ceremony was in a Seoul hotel built to make everyone inside it feel important. Chandeliers, tables pressed flat and white. Men in suits moving through the room with the ease of people who had never needed to argue for their place anywhere. Champagne appearing in hands that hadn't finished wanting it yet. She was in amber. Deep, warm amber that caught every light in that chandelier-drunk room and gave it back. Long brown waves over one shoulder. She moved through the crowd the way she moved through every room, like she had every right to it. And she found him the moment she walked in and raised her glass across the room in their private hello. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 2 weeks. Like she had taken something apart in him, and he had quietly, completely stopped wanting it put back together. She crossed to him through the crowd, carrying a second glass. "You looked like you needed something to hold," she said. "I always look like that." "I know." She tilted her head up at him. "Tonight especially." "I'm fine." She looked at his face with the seeing kind of look she had, the one that made his walls feel approximately half their usual height. "Okay," she said, in the tone that meant, "I'll leave it. For now." She turned to face the room beside him, their arms close enough to touch. Neither of them moved away. He looked at the side of her face, the high cheekbone, the curve of her mouth, all that warmth she carried everywhere she went like it was simply part of her, and thought, "Mine." He didn't know that 4 minutes from now the floor was going to drop out from under everything. The MC's voice rose over the room. Recognition of the program graduates. Appreciation for the sponsors. And then, "We are especially honored this evening by a keynote supporter whose investment in this program goes well beyond the financial. A man whose belief in developing the next generation of protection professionals has been consistent and personal. Please welcome Mr. James Martins." The applause lifted. James walked to the podium, silver at the temples, warm open face, wide smile already forming as the room welcomed him. He moved through that space the way powerful men move when they are completely at ease in their power, not performing it, simply wearing it. James acknowledged the graduates warmly. He spoke about the program with obvious pride. He was funny and self-deprecating, and the room liked him immediately, the way rooms always did. Then he smiled and said, "I have one more thing. A personal one. This year, someone very close to me completed this program. She registered quietly. She was very insistent about that. And she asked for no special treatment, and I gave her none. But I cannot stand at this podium and not acknowledge her." He looked out over the crowd of trainees. 018. Will you come up?" Every head in that room turned. Every trainee knew exactly who 018 was. They had known since the first morning. The paint on her wrist, the sketchbooks in her bag, the woman who argued with fall techniques and laughed loud enough to fill corridors, and called the most senior officer in the cohort tiger to his face, without a moment's hesitation. There was no mystery about 018. What no one had known was this. Zaya stood up from her seat. She smoothed her amber dress. She smiled the smile that took up her whole face, wide, warm, completely uncontained. And she walked up to that stage and slipped her arm through James Martins's elbow and leaned up to say something in his ear that made him throw his head back and laugh, his big, warm laugh. The room applauded. Kai stood with a champagne glass in his hand and 19 years running through him at once. Martins, 018, Zaya. James Martins had a daughter. James Martins had kept his family so carefully, so deliberately, off every document, every file, every photograph, that in 19 years of building a case around this man, Kai had never once found a trace of her. She had come back to Seoul a year ago under a different name. She had registered for the program quietly and without announcement. He had not known. There was no way he could have known. And standing in that ballroom watching her laugh on that stage with her father's arm in hers, Kai understood something very clearly. Not knowing had cost him nothing, because the mission had never required her. But knowing now, standing here with her laugh still warm in his memory and the my still sitting in his chest from the obstacle course, knowing now was going to cost him everything. James Martins leaned toward the microphone. And I hear that she made quite an impression during the program. He smiled out at the crowd. His eyes found the room with the specific warmth of a father who wanted to share something precious. 018 tells me she had an excellent partner. I just want that person to know. Thank you for looking after her. Zaya's head turned. She was already scanning the crowd for him. She wanted him to see this, to share this moment, to stand in the place where the two things she cared most about could finally exist in the same room together. She found him. She saw his face. He was white. He completely still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. This was not composure. This was a man standing inside a collision. Something catastrophic behind his eyes that he was not moving fast enough to close. She took one step toward him from the stage, instinctive and confused. He set his glass down on the nearest table. He walked out. He did not look back. Not once. She watched him go from the stage, her arm still in her father's, her smile fading into something she didn't have a name for yet. James followed her gaze to the door. He looked at her face. He said nothing. But something passed through his expression, quiet, considered, and he covered her hand with his and squeezed it once. The ceremony ended. She looked for Kai. He was gone. Not just from the ballroom, from the building, from the car park, from every message she sent that went unanswered. She stood outside in the amber dress with her phone in her hand, and the night air cold, and thought about his face, the catastrophe behind his eyes, the way he had put the glass down like he was setting something down that had become too heavy. She did not understand it yet. But something in her chest understood that whatever it was not small. Across the city, Seojun found Kai in his apartment at midnight sitting on the floor in front of the corkboard. Not on the couch. On the floor, back against the wall, knees up, looking at James Martin's photograph at the center of the red string like a man trying to understand how two things he had kept completely separate for 19 years had somehow ended up in the same place. Seojun sat down beside him without asking. He had been at that ceremony. He had seen Zaya walk onto that stage. He had seen Kai's face in the moment before he put the glass down and walked out. He had driven here directly. He did not say anything for a while. He just sat there. Then Heron's voice came through the speaker between them, because Seojun had called her on the way over and she had said, "Put me on speaker and keep me on," and she was still there. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the start." Kai told them. Flat, measured, everything. The program, the pairing, the training, the storage room. He left some things out and neither of them pushed. The obstacle course. The my that had come out before he had a chance to stop it. 3 weeks of something he had not built a single wall against because he had not known he would need one. And then, her name is Martins. James Martins' daughter. The silence that followed was the specific silence of two people who understood the full weight of what they had just been told. Heron spoke first. He never had family in the file. He kept them off everything. She came back a year ago under her mother's name. There was no way to know. And she doesn't know about you, Seojin said. It wasn't a question. She knows my name. She knows my parents died. She knows... He stopped. He pressed his thumb against his closed eye for a moment. She knows things I haven't told anyone in years. Heron was quiet on the line. You love her, Seojin said. Kai said nothing. Kai. Seojin's voice was careful, and the careful voice of a man who had known him since they were 20 and had watched him build every wall he owned brick by brick and had never once seen him leave a gap in any of them. Look at me. Kai looked at him. You love her, Seojin said again. Not an accusation. Just the truth. Offered plainly, because someone needed to say it out loud first. Kai looked back at the corkboard. It doesn't change anything, he said. It changes everything, Heron said from the speaker. Flat, direct, no softening. You walked out of that ceremony and you left her standing on a stage with no explanation after 3 weeks of whatever those 3 weeks were. She is going to come looking for answers. What are you going to tell her? Nothing. Not yet. And the mission? He put his hand flat against James Martins' photograph. Pressed it there. The mission was here before she was. Kai. 19 years, he said. Quiet. Final. 19 years, Heron. The line was silent. Seojin looked at the board, at the red string, at his friend's hand flat over a photograph of James Martins and the expression on his face that was the most complicated thing Seojin had ever seen on a human being. Grief and want and duty all occupying the same space at the same time with no room for any of them to breathe. When this goes wrong, Heron said finally from the speaker, and it will go wrong, don't wait as long to fix it as you're waiting to admit it's wrong right now. Nobody answered her. Nobody had anything to say to that. Seojin stayed. Because that was what you did. 3 days later, Kai's phone rang. James Martin's security liaison. A request had come through James personally. A professional protection officer for his daughter. Residential placement? Immediate. James had reasons he did not fully detail. The same reasons, the liaison said, that had led him to enroll her in the program in the first place. The circles he moved in. The precautions a man in his position took. He wanted someone capable, vetted, and available immediately. The only recently certified candidate who fit all criteria. Kai. He stood in front of the corkboard with the phone in his hand. This was it. This was what 19 years of building had been aimed at, not from the outside, not through documents and surveillance, but from the inside. Inside the house, inside the family. The kind of access that turned suspicion into evidence. He thought about her laugh. In the way it filled rooms without trying, the "my" that had come out of his mouth on the obstacle course in front of no one, meaning every syllable. The small, satisfied sound she had made against his lips in the dark, and how it had moved through him like something irreversible. He thought about his parents, the face-down photograph. Victor's voice saying, "You are almost there." He thought about 19 years. The liaison was waiting. The two things sat in his chest. The mission that had existed long before she did, and the feeling that had arrived without permission and refused to leave. And they sat there together, and they were not compatible. And he knew it, and he stood there knowing it, holding the phone, making himself look at what he was about to choose, and what it would cost. He thought about her face when she had looked for him across that ballroom, open, wanting to share something, trusting. He closed his eyes. He opened them. Does he say yes? Everything he has built is on one side. Everything he has found is on the other. And he is standing in his apartment at midnight, making the decision that will determine what kind of man he actually is. Drop a comment right now. What would you do? Which would you choose? Because I need to know who's watching this and what you think he deserves. Like this video. Subscribe and turn on that notification bell because part 2 is dropping soon, and when it does, you will want to be the first person in that comment section. Because what happens next? The house, the table, the truth that is coming for all of them, is going to change everything. Part 2 is dropping very soon. Don't miss it. Thanks for watching.